Moving on to the pump, these pumps are notorious for going bad. What usually happens in these is that the flow regulator valve will either get stuck or get seized or get flogged out, and then when you have a reduced pressure in the transmission, all sorts of things will happen. As well as not supplying the proper amount of pressure to each clutch pack and each unit, you reduce your lubrication through the transmission as well, and your cooling as well, because this circulates it through the cooling line. So we're just going to whiz this off. I've already loosened it, and that's a 10mm Allen key. Plug, spring, I just need to get some circlip pliers to get that out. And hopefully you can see that, but you can see I'm just trying to get the right angle there. We've got a lot of shiny stainless steel in our assembly room, but you can see how it's all scored. So this one was still working. It failed because of that variator pulley was locked up, but it wouldn't have been long before this one either seized right up. This one was probably damaged more because of the fine metal that was floating through circulating through the transmission. So there is a kit. Sonex have a kit where they have a valve that's actually, I think it's a little bit longer, and it allows it to guide to a portion of that bore where the original one hasn't travelled through. So even if this part was worn, it would be sealing on that new part. But what I like to do is use the Transguy Kit, and the Transguy Kit actually has a whole new sleeve. You can see that it's a metal sleeve instead of the anodized alloy sleeve piston or valve, and you just replace the whole thing. You push that right in to the step. This will hold the end plug, will hold it in place, and you use the replacement pin. They just seem to not get worn out as quickly. So two options for you: either go the Sonex, which have a same size valve and a little bit longer, or replace the whole thing with this replacement Transguy. Make that kit. Now the actual pump part of it, you can see there's a little O-ring in there that seals it. So make sure if you are replacing, you replace that O-ring. It'll just, you don't want that pump leaking at all if possible. The actual pump part is in this unit here, and they're a vane pump. So you've also got this end O-ring that's actually shaped for that groove. So you want to make sure that that's back in place as well when you put it back together. Oh, there we go. And the actual vane pump, you can see, is as new. So very rare for these to really bugger up unless you've really got a lot of metal contamination. And you can see the little vanes. I didn't want it to all fall apart on me like that. And you can see the little vanes there. Well, they're directional. If you have a look, they're flat, or they've been wearing on one side. So I like to actually turn it over 180 degrees and turn the inside part that hasn't had any wear to the outside part and flip it over, just because it's always pushing one way. It'll wear a piece on the side. That's if you're reusing it. If you're replacing the pump, that's a different story. But if everything looks okay, and this pump doesn't look too bad. Now, a couple of things to note when you are putting the pump together. The notches, or these notches here, actually go towards the bottom. They're facing down into the pump. Also, you'll find that there's a little mark there, and that mark there actually faces towards this little bolt hole there, or close to it. If you put the valve towards yourself, you'll know it's that left-hand bolt hole. So you'll end up putting that back in there like so. You can actually see where the old mark was, or like that. And then these little pins will be located in those little holes on the top cover when you put that on, with the opening again towards yourself. You can't really muck that one up. You can't put the bolts in. Now, with the pump rotor, you'll notice it's got little holes on one side and not on the other. You want to have the dots facing down into the pump. So we put all that together, and we've taken a note of which side you can see where it's there's more wear there, because that's actually how it's pushing. It's pushing that way. So we're going to actually just flip it 180 degrees like so. If you saw that, just like that, and we flip it over. So it's in an entirely new spot. The old inside part of the vane will be on the outside, and also that part that was worn will now be on the inside of the little slots in the rotor. Now we just put it back together and tighten it up. Don't forget your O-rings, top and bottom, and we tighten it up to about 25 Newton meter, or 26 Newton meter. Do it in a cross fashion, just to try and get that cover on evenly. And that's basically it. That's the pump for you. Good idea to check all your Torrington bearings as well. This is the planetary, and we have what's called the sun gear. That's the gear that runs in the middle. Then you've got your planetary, if you can imagine the planets going around the sun. So you've got your sun gear, your planetary gear, and then on the outside of that gear, and that other gear that runs on the outside of those planetary gears is called the annulus. It should be actually called the universe, I suppose, because, yeah. But anyway, so you want to just check all those. Also, because before, I think earlier in the video I mentioned that they don't look like the directional, but they sort of are, because what happens, the piston pushing up, there is a circlip on the inside as well, so it doesn't really affect it, but you want to have that sharp edge of that annulus gear to the outside, so if there is any pressure pushing on it, the flat side will come up to the circlip. The other side's just slightly sort of rounded, so that's what you do. Now with the planetary, you just want to check, make sure that those rollers are all good and that there's no grumbly sounds or anything like that, and that's basically it. There's not much you can do with them except replace the whole thing. This one looks okay, so we're not going to replace that one. With your forward clutch, they come with a moulded piston, so there's no O-rings to replace or anything like that. You just replace the whole piston, replace your clutches, and that's what they look like. You just basically just take it out. In other videos I've actually shown if they are a lip seal, so they'll be sort of like a little skirt. If you can imagine Marilyn Monroe's dress blowing in the wind, when it gets pressure under there, the seal will open, or the lip will open, so that's what actually seals it and pushes it up through the thing. To get them in, you don't want to damage that nice sharp edge on it, so what I do is I put an O-ring, a slightly smaller O-ring on it, and that'll pull that lip in and put it in the freezer. Leave it in the freezer for half an hour or so, depending on what weather you're working in. Here I've got to leave it a little bit longer because we're in the middle of summer, and then you just come out, boom, put it in. Make sure you have a bit of oil or Vaseline there just to lubricate it as it goes in, and don't force it in. If you muck it up or if you're too slow, just stop, put the O-ring back on again. You might need to find a tighter O-ring or something like that and put it back in your freezer, and give it another crack when it's cold again. So that's basically the forward clutch. The reverse clutch is actually located in the case, in that middle or main part of the case. And the same thing goes. You've got to put an O-ring on there just to compress that lip a little bit. And you can see the new one there. It is quite spongy there. I haven't taken that out of the plastic yet. And it actually tells you just, you know, common sense. When you're opening it, don't stab the seal or cut the seal when you're getting the plastic off, so just be careful when you're taking it out of the packaging. The differential carrier bearings, these ones look spotless, so I'm actually not going to replace them, but same thing, you just use a pulley to pull them off. The spider gears, you can rotate them 180 degrees. You could even, the pin that goes through, I'll pull that out. The pin that goes through the spider gears, if you mark it with a die grinder where the top of it is, and just knock that pin out, you can turn that by 180 degrees. You'll find that spider gear shaft will be just worn on one side. Just the way everything works, it's always putting a force on it on one side. So by flipping it over, it's actually wearing on a new spot. So you can actually swap those spider gears over, put the left one on the right side, right one on the left side, turn the shaft over 180 degrees, and also these gears here you can swap them over too if you want. Important to note that those outer gears, they have got splines, and you want to just confirm that they have the same number of splines, and that those gears actually are the same to be able to swap them over. And finally, we've got the pinion gear. Just check the teeth that they're not chipped or anything like that. That there's no little wear slots in it. And also check the bearings if they're okay. So that one looks okay, so we'll just put that one back in as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention the clearance in those clutch packs in both the reverse and the forward is 1.2 to 1.5 millimeters. Now if you're putting new clutch plates in, they will compress a little bit, so you'd want to go to the close to the 1.2 end clearance than the 1.5, because they will compress a little bit. So that's just another little thing to watch out for. Now the valve body, it doesn't have a valve body gasket on the separator plate. Possibly it would even be an improvement if they ever made one to add one to it, just so it seals a lot better. And there are also little filters in there. It's a fairly big job to go through it. I'm not going to show it on this video. And another thing to check are the solenoids. Check your resistances, make sure they're all within specs, and also being aware that even at room temperature, if they check out to be okay, sometimes they'll fail when they're warmed up or they get to operating temperature. So you can actually get to the solenoids without removing the transmission, so you can sort of flush them out, clean them out, test them, put them in, and then just be aware that you might have to drop the valve body again to replace them. So it's up to you. The filter, if you're ordering a filter, this one's actually it's got a little snorkel on it on the XTrails. It's a 23mm snorkel on it, 24mm. So just be aware of that. You want to have it as long as you can if you've got a deep pan. If you put the wrong filter in, you possibly will be sucking air as you're going around a corner. So just make sure that the filter's the right one, and also the other filter, the one that's in the cooler. There's a cooler there. We're going to replace that as well, because they're prone to getting a little crack in there, and then you get coolant going into the transmission fluid. So it's worth replacing those. But again, up to you. You can replace these later down the track without removing the transmission as well. We've got that in another video. But the problem is once that coolant becomes impregnated in the clutch plates, the transmission won't operate correctly or as well as it would. You'll always get a little bit of slippage or even steaming in different parts of the transmission. So I'm going to replace it, but entirely up to you. That's basically about it. If you do pull this apart, just want to make a note of where any shims are. Also just check that the bearing hasn't spun in the casing anywhere. This one looks okay, the end cover. Occasionally you'll even find that it'll blow the end right out of that casing over here on the secondary variator pulley. Just the force, the way it works, when they seize up, it'll just boom, crack it right out. Show control lever, just check that for wear as well. That's the one that actually moves the on the primary variator pulley. So just make sure that that's not worn or anything like that as well. With the sensors I mentioned earlier, they have to be a precise distance from the little unit that it's running the pulse off. So you'll find that the other one, or this one here, is actually shimmed. Not this one, the other one. Anyway, there were two little shims there. I'm not exactly sure of how much distance they're supposed to be, but there is a measurement there. Just return it to original and you're pretty right then. If the long pin has dropped out somewhere on the way, that just goes on the selector shaft. And that's basically it. There's another bearing in here you can take out and just check, and that's basically it. The drive belts, they are directional, so just hopefully you've made a note of the little arrow on it, if the arrow is still there, and you can see the arrow there. So with the arrow facing you, it's going to the left, going that way, so clockwise. The way these things work, they sort of work like a sprag clutch type setup. If you can see, there's a little, they sort of look like a little P shape, the letter P. And what happens, these will just sort of flex a little bit and dig in. The belt's actually, the primary one actually pushes the other variator, and that's how it works. So that's why it's important to have it perfectly mirror finish on those variator pulleys. It just sort of works like a snake skin or snake scales. It'll be smooth going one way, and the other way there'll be like a little sharp edge. These will sort of twist a little bit and dig into the variator and just push it. So that's how they work. If you don't put these tie down straps on, it's a massive process to put it back together. So even the new ones, they come with a strap. There's like little bands there. I don't know how many there are, but there's quite a few, you can see. And these little blades, they're directional. They need to be all in the same direction for it to work properly. You can put it back together, but it's a lot of fun. I haven't done it, but I've heard of people spending couple of hours putting it all back together. So it's definitely worth a couple of tie down straps. Here I have a diagram of the valve body. You can see that the valves are numbered there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 1 is the regulator valve. They're prone to wearing out, so make sure you check that. And also number 4, the lock-up control valve. So 1 and 4, just check that they're not worn or scored or anything like that. And here are the specs. on all those valves. So you can freeze frame it and just have another look. And there, the location of the valves there. A little bit hard to get it all on one screen because you can't read it if you can see the whole picture. But anyway, there it is for you. And there's the other part of the valve body. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The secondary pulley regulator valve. Make sure you check that. Basically, you got to check all the valves. It says to check everything, but there are critical wear points that you want to make sure that you check, which are basically your pressure regulator valves on anything. So they're the valves there, and there are your specs for those valves. So you can freeze frame it on there. Have a look, and there's the whole diagram there. Bit hard to read from that distance. And we've got the ratio control valve, or the selector. And again, there's the specs for that valve. Make sure you make a note of where all the solenoids go. You can't really muck it up anyway. The loom's actually too short for it to be mucked up, but it's a good idea to just keep an eye on everything. And you've also got the little pressure sensors there. I don't know if you can see that. A bit hard to get there. Just make a note of those. And when you get it apart, just make sure you make a note or a scribe mark, something that you can identify easily, where all the check valves and the little filters are. That's very important. Usually you have little marks on the valve on the separator plate. That's if it's got steel balls. If they've got rubber balls, then you're in trouble. So it's a good idea to just make a note of everything. Good habit to get into, to just mark where all those check balls are. And also some valve bodies will be slightly different. They'll have less or more check balls. The separator plate will be slightly different. So the shop manuals sometimes don't show you all that information. And finally, there's a diagram of the air pressure test you can do on it after you've got it all reassembled without the valve body. And it's a good idea to do that. But you need to be aware that on some transmissions you can't use the full air pressure in your compressor. You've got to actually reduce the air pressure. Also, air's a lot thinner than oil as well, so you need to be aware of that as well when you're testing these things. So a small amount of leakage with air won't be there when there's oil involved. And there's a slight wearing in period. Everything needs to sort of sit where it needs to sit, so that takes a little bit of time as well. Anyway, we're going to go ahead with our reconditioning now. I'm not going to film the whole lot of it, but I trust that some of the information I've given you here is going to be helpful if you are brave enough or capable of tackling the transmission yourself. Thank you for watching. I'll say that now, and I might say it again if I continue filming the reconditioning and reassembly of the transmission. Thank you.